Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. So my name is Kurt Johnson. I'm with Senator Amy Klobuchar's office. This is our fifth stop on a two-day tour of rural Minnesota here. And we're calling this the Rebuilding Minnesota Tour. What our office is doing is the senator, since she's got a lot going on right now, as you can imagine, she sends her staffers out here to the community to listen to discussion on specific issues. The ones that we're here to talk about today specifically is transportation, housing, infrastructure, broadband. And that's why we nicknamed it the Rebuilding Minnesota Tour, because while all those, it's a broad subject, but all of them are so in-depthly intertwined that talking about one is nearly impossible without talking about the other one. And so I'm joined here by myself with Ronald Lee from our office, as well as Andy Martin. If I could just go kind of around the room real quick to everybody introduce themselves. Can I start with you?
Certainly. Michelle Pipper, and I'm with Cass County Health Team and Veteran Services.
Tammy Stevens with Cass County.
Scott Wilson, Cass County Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
I'm Steve Howard. I'm the IT and Development Manager at Albany Communications.
Marina Lovell, Cass County Economic Development Corporation.
At Casting Insurance Agent and Ambridge Community Ambassador.
Derek Jensen, I'm with the Chamber here in Walker.
Roxy Parks, and I'm with the Chamber.
Carrie Bjorklund, City Administrator for Walker.
Jed Shaw, City of Walker Mayor.
I'm Al Sanford, I live here.
Steve Backholm, Center for Independent Living.
Serge Phillips, Minnesota DOT.
Mike Paulus, Cass County Economic Development Corporation.
Seth Leefer, I also work for MINDEP, and I'm not authorized to represent them.
I'm Audio Lino, I work for Government Relations for Leech Lake.
Living Fairbanks, Government Relations, Leech Lake.
Alani County Leadership and Louis Romby, Field Representative to Congressman Pete Sauer.
Come join us.
I'm Teresa Eklund. I'm the Executive Director of Faith in Action for Cass County, a nonprofit that provides free transportation and homemaking and help services for folks so they can stay here living in community.
And
Skip Duchesneau with D.W. Jones Housing Development.
Outstanding. And then just to complete
Chris Hogan, I'm with Walker Pilot.
Ann Tracy and I write for Blended on Broadband.
Well, thank you all so much for making the time and coming and joining us on those video. The format we'll do here is we do have a quick video from the senator to show you that she's prepared in advance to kind of talk exactly why we're here. And then we'll give a little bit of a policy background of what we know that's happening out in Washington on these subjects. And then it's going to be mostly a roundtable room discussion while we're sitting in a circle to really start talking about everything. So without further ado.
Hello to everyone gathered today. Thanks so much for joining my staff for this discussion about some of Greater Minnesota's most pressing transportation, infrastructure, and housing needs. I figure kids that grow up in rural Minnesota should be able to live there. But we need your ideas. It shouldn't just be us talking to you. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives, because whether you're in Pine City or Brainerd or Aiken, Wadena, Walker, or Bemidji, each of you know firsthand how important investments in things like safe roads, bridges, and reliable broadband are for cities and towns in Greater Minnesota to thrive. Today's meeting is an opportunity for you to highlight some of the local initiatives that I've heard bits and pieces about, and I know what good work you're doing, and to share your ideas with us for further improvements. It's going to allow me, when our staff brings them back to me, to use them as examples on the Senate floor, to use them as examples as we fight for funding and moving forward and make sure that we do not leave rural Minnesota and rural America behind. Because as you know, much of our nation's infrastructure is in urgent need of repair. This year, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association found that about 47,000 U.S. bridges are structurally deficient. That is unacceptable. No one knows this better than us. We all remember when that 35W bridge collapsed in the Mississippi River more than a decade ago. On that day, as the eyes of the nation were on us, we came together. And 13 months later, we rebuilt that bridge. But we didn't stop there. In 2015, we made a big step forward when we passed the FAST Act, which authorized $305 billion in funding for highway and motor vehicle safety, public transportation, hazardous material safety, as well as technology programs. I continue to be a strong supporter of flexible competitive grant programs, from build to infra to SIG grants. I know these are critical tools for modernizing our infrastructure. In fact, just last December, I helped secure a $20 billion build grant to reconstruct an interchange in northern Minnesota. That spurs investments. And I think you know about how some of our smaller communities, not as expensive to invest, whether it's an underpass, whether it is a rail overpass, whether it is a bridge that needs to be fixed or a road. These investments matter to local businesses and encourage economic expansion. I still remember one community where even the street lights were helpful. There's still more we need to do. I want to thank you for focusing on this, for making the case for broadband infrastructure. There is no reason that I should hear stories like yours and the one from Fort Ripley, the student who actually wrote an essay to his local carrier about how he had to hold his phone next to one window in his home to try to get a connection to download the information he needed to do his homework. We can do better. That's why I believe we need increased investment as well as an infrastructure financing authority. Those are the kinds of things that we need if we're going to get broadband and we're going to get the kind of help we need in rural America. And we need to make sure that any plan we do has carve-outs and very clear piece of this about rural. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm very excited that we're going to hear from all of you about what's happening with transportation and housing, as well as any other issues you want to raise when it comes to healthcare or other things. Because as I said at the beginning, I believe that kids that grow up in rural Minnesota should be able to live there. Thanks so much. Look forward to hearing about your ideas.
Perfect. And so that's basically straight from her. That's why we're here. That's what we're excited here to talk to you about. We're getting great feedback from other counties on our tour here. To jump right into the brief updates we can give you on what's happening in the federal level on transportation. The FAST Act, which is the nation's, it's the big transportation bill. That's going, the process for that is it does go through multiple committees. We're tracking that it has gone through the Commerce Committee for their markups on that. We believe it's going to be going through the EPW, finishing those markups here later this month, as well as the banking committee should be finishing theirs. We don't have an exact timeline, but it's going to be before January. It's a bill that's too important to everyone to not get done during this session, and making sure that we're providing all the infrastructure needs for, that we have grants that are applied for, with bringing funding towards our roads here that counties can apply for. It's something that our office is making sure that we're bringing back home here to Minnesota. On the broadband piece of things, one of the senator's biggest focuses lately is we helped get a bill passed this summer that helps focus on mapping, specifically to make sure that we know whether a community is being served or underserved, that map is actually accurate, and that we can start finding out where those needs are and how do we maybe adjust where federal funding needs to go towards those kinds of programs, making sure that we're not leaving rural Minnesota behind, because we know how much of an impact broadband has on economic development as well as just everyone's day in life here in 2019. And the other thing that she does is we're focusing on not just the mapping piece of it, but she's organized a task force on agriculture policy. We know how important that is to farmers these days. When we don't, it's not something that's clear to everybody about the connection between broadband and agriculture, but when ranchers utilize it to run their everyday businesses, it's something that we know that it's a vital, it's a key piece here in Minnesota, and so she's making sure that that piece is being addressed. With that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Sher, who's been joining us for our tour as well, to kind of talk about what's happening in the state issues.
Thanks, Kurt. I'll just add that I just got a note from Kelly Misselwitz, who is the legislative director for Councilman Omar, that they're doing a hearing on infrastructure next week on the budget committee. Omar and McCollum are on the budget committee in the House. So it's, it sounds like they're gearing up in the House for their version of the bill. So hello, bonjour. My name is Serge Phillips. I work with the central office for government affairs. We have a state legislative person, we have a federal legislative person, D, and we have a tribal relations office in our government affairs office. I don't work with the operations; those are spread out over the whole state. You guys, of course, are in D2, right? Yeah. We're in D2, which is JT Anderson, and the planner is Darren Lesh. And I'm just here to briefly talk about the fund on the state level. This session, we identified for the governor's benefit and, well, the state's benefit, that highway funding needs were $6 billion for 10 years and $18 billion for 20 years. So there was a governor's proposal to raise the state gas tax by 20 cents per gallon and increase vehicle registration fees and metro sales tax. And so that passed the House, but it did not, but it failed in the Senate. So we're back to square one at the state level. So our hope resides with the Reauthorization Act or any other federal legislation. And you know, as Kurt said, the FAST Act ends in September of 2020. At that time, there'll not only be a need for a new Reauthorization Act, but there'll need to be additional revenue. Because right now the revenue for federal transportation programs comes from the federal highway gas tax, which is 18.4 cents, hasn't been changed since 1993. And revenues are not keeping up with the program funding levels. So it's estimated that in 2020, when the FAST Act expires, spending will exceed revenue by $16 billion. And if that happens, by the end of 21, the Highway Trust Fund is estimated to have a 40% drop in obligation authority, which is like a credit card limit. Obligation authority comes first, and then contract authority is what the federal government then is obligated to pay. So at a 40% cut, you know, that'd be devastating to all the state's programs. So we really hope that you know, some energy is created in Congress to develop some revenue, and you know, I'm joining Senator Klobuchar's office. We're hearing from every stop about really good projects that aren't getting funded because there's not enough money. So let them know about it. Let Stauber's rep is here. Let him know about it. He's on the House Committee, House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and let's see what we can do. Thank you.
And then I'll turn over Al real quick.
Hello everyone, I'll keep my end on the federal update on housing a little bit short, because we're here to obviously listen to the local experts here on these issues. But currently, now's a great time to talk HUD housing, because currently we're monitoring the T-HUD appropriations bill as it works its way through committee. And what that is, it's essentially the funding bill that supports all the local HUD programming that is being utilized around here. Senator Klobuchar, she reached out to Senator Shelby and Collins, who are the chairs of the T-HUD Appropriations Committee, to express their support for some of the affordable housing programs that are being utilized, including the HOME program, which creates block grants for state and local government to then help developers create affordable housing. In addition to that, she's also made sure that that she expressed her support for the community development block grants, which are distributed, or grants that are distributed out to the communities to be utilized for development purposes, including that the National Housing Trust Fund, which is a part of that as well. So, and in addition to that, last year we were able to sustain our funding levels for like other affordable housing programs, such as Section 8, Section 4, LIHTC, which is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, as well, the HOME program, among a few others. In fact, with LIHTC and the HOME program, we were able to increase funding on both of those measures. In addition to that, Senator Klobuchar has also been a supporter of USDA housing and development programs out there, which offer services such as rental assistance with home loans, housing rehab, among a few others. So on that note, I think it would be a good transition to talk about housing on there. I know we have Scott Wilson here from the HRA and some developer representatives as well. So if you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit more about sort of the housing climate in the region in terms of accessibility, affordability, and availability.
I think, thank you. The biggest thing for Cass County is we have basically 220 people on our waiting list for Section 8. We don't have enough units to go to. We're seeing right now probably a 3 to 5 month waiting time for giving out the voucher to when they can actually get into the unit. So we're not seeing that affordable housing unit that's marketable, that passes the inspection criteria that we have. So it's kind of a lag time to try to get people on the program. So we're trying to be proactive with that, trying to do lease in place preferences so that they have a lease in place when they come on, they get a higher score on their Section 8 application. The other part is trying to get affordable housing in the communities. I know Skip's been proactive in doing a lot of that. And one of the things that we look at going forward is in Cass County we have four actual public housing agencies. So there's Cass Lake, Walker, Pine River, and Cass County all have public housing authorities. So we have the public housing side, and one of the things that the HUD is looking at is taking our public housing and transitioning it into Section 8. So we have that opportunity going forward, so we can privately place our vouchers to that property. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, then we'd be basically a landlord rather than a public housing authority from that standpoint, and basically expanding the Section 8 program.
And one issue that we ran into in Medina during our discussion earlier this morning was a lot of times when folks end up, qualifying, they receive their housing voucher, a lot of times the availability is not there within, and then that, further extends their, chances of getting a house. Is that something that you're facing out in this region as well?
It is. So when they get the voucher, they have basically 60 to 90 days to try to fill that voucher. We're doing extensions trying to get them a unit. So that's one of the biggest concerns that we see. And one of the other things that we have kind of looked at, kind of a small part, is if we did a private placement with a developer where we could put X amount of our vouchers, knowing that those units would be available for affordability for our Section 8 program. So if they were able to develop something.
And I'll just add, as a light tech developer, we've done an expensive amount of that since about '87. And part of the issue is that program hasn't seen a lot of funding growth. In the last year, there was I think that was just a 1 year additional light tech.
I think it was a 1 year 12% increase.
Right, which we're very appreciative.
But you definitely want that extended.
Right, and I know there's a bill out there that I think has pretty good bipartisan support to increase the light tech by 50%, which would be very beneficial. But the light tech program is so competitive. In greater Minnesota, there's about 10, maybe 11 projects a year that get funded. So you take the whole state of Minnesota and put 10 little dots on it, I mean, it doesn't even scratch the surface. And it's so competitive, it's about 4 or 5 applications to one that gets funded. People get tired of submitting applications, and it costs a lot of money and time to do that, and don't get the projects funded. And so, having that bill, and I wish I knew the bill number, but I believe you know what it is, for the 50% increase would be very beneficial. And having more affordable housing then does provide more opportunities for HRAs to place vouchers and people into the housing. So any support there would be great. The other thing that I see, because we work all over northern Minnesota, is it's also affordable housing, but it's affordable market rate housing.
Yes.
And the state of Minnesota has a very small program that they've been funding about $2 million a year that funds about 3 projects. And it's fairly competitive as well. But there's so many communities where people over 60% of the median income are just stuck in this spot where there is no housing for them. The market rate housing dictates somebody 80% or 100% of median income. And you can't, I mean, that you can do, but all these little people who work in all the businesses downtown and have a difficult time finding a place to live. And we've been successful through that program, through Minnesota Housing Financing, building some units in Deep River Falls for DigiKey, in Glenwood. We have one that just started in Pelican Rapids. but it's a very small program. I do one building a year, and the federal government doesn't have any programs whatsoever for that, and it's a huge need in Greater Minnesota. And you can send this to not only the people who work, but seniors. And the whole senior wave that's coming is just gonna compound itself as to what a mess that's gonna be. So, my 2 cents.
And if I can add to that, just one other point, like our Section 8 program, we haven't seen the inflation factor going up with the amount of funds. So our funds have been basically stagnant. And in order to increase our voucher numbers, so we have 137 vouchers that we're eligible for. But because of the cost of the units, and when people get on the program, they look at it and they go, well, if I don't work, I don't have to pay as much for my rent. And the rents go up, and then we run out of our funding. So we're funding about 85 of our 137 vouchers. So if there's a way to increase the voucher number, would be astronomical for us, because that would give us about a 35% increase in the assistance that we could provide. So.
And I want to bring in Lenny and Clinton to the conversation as well, and tell us what you're seeing, from the band's perspective in terms of affordable housing.
Absolutely. So we're facing, and we have faced for a number of years, severe housing crisis on the reservation. And we have done multiple innovative things to address the situation. One of the things that our housing authority is really focusing right now in constructing affordable housing is tax credit financing projects. That's been one thing that has been a very useful tool. I know last month we had the Minnesota Tribal-wide Housing Conference, and Senator Smith gave a keynote address at that conference, and she went through the waiting lists for affordable housing at each reservation. And I think maybe Boys Fort had 150 on their waiting list, Red Lake had 200, and Lynch Lake has 500, over 500 people on the waiting list. And that's a multi-year waiting list, and so that doesn't capture the full amount because there are a number of people who just don't reapply after their year-long time on the waiting list expires. But I know that we are right now building housing development south of the city of Cass Lake in Wilkinson Township. It's the Prescott development is what we call it. And there's currently in progress 30 homes that are being built through tax credit financing. But when those 30 homes are finished, there will be more housing units available in the Prescott development than there are throughout the city of Cass Lake, which is one of the largest cities in Cass County. And so that should give just a estimate of the housing need that we have on the Lynch Lake Reservation. The primary funding source for our housing authority is NAHASTA, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, which was enacted in the funding formula that's currently used in the mid-90s. And since Leech Lake has started receiving funding under that program in 1998, there's been no increase. So we're looking at 1998 numbers, 21-year-old numbers that we're using to try to fund our housing authority and maintain affordable housing on the reservation for Native people. But we face the same issues that I think every community here in northern Minnesota is facing, because we have a workforce as well on the reservation. Leech Lake is the largest employer in Cass County, and we have workers that there's no affordable housing on the reservations. It's basically low-income housing or $1 million lake homes. That's kind of what you're looking at on the reservation. And so for that middle group of people who are tribal employees who come and work either at the casinos or within the tribal programs, they're finding that they have to live further and further away to obtain housing. And so we're in our tribal development program, our housing authority right now, we're working to come up with some strategies to develop programs so that we can have affordable housing for all sectors of our tribal community. But we definitely are facing a huge housing crisis, and we do need a continued increase in the HOSPA funding, as well as the ability to, what would be very nice is if we could restructure the way tax credit financing works so that we could do more than one project at one time. Because right now, we're building those 30 homes right now, the Prescott development, but we have to wait until those homes are finished and the infrastructure is there and everything's in place and those units are filled before we can move on to the next project. But we've already got the next project lined up in our District 1 community, which is in Itasca County. So, I mean, it would be nice if we were able to continue to build on multiple programs at the same time. But right now, the way the tax credit financing is set up through the internal revenue code, we're not able to.
And a couple quick follow-up questions. So, that tax credit program that you mentioned, is that a state or federal program, or?
So the tax credit financing, the way it works is there are private investors who put money into the building of homes, but then they get a federal income tax credit for that investment.
So it's the LIHTC.
Oh, LIHTC, okay, I just wanna make sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's the LIHTC.
And then, in terms of like the pacing of the projects, how long does it take to, like, how maybe you complete in like a year or like a 5-year span, or?
Well, that depends on the size and scope of the project like this. So like this Prescott project that we're doing right now, one of the things that was actually difficult, and we haven't touched on it yet, was the infrastructure development that had to go in, actually building roads and getting water and sewer in so that the construction could take place. And that was something that delayed the project a little bit. That goes into issues with the tribal roads program that we can talk about when we get to the FAST Act. But it depends, but what we like to see is we like to see a project done every 1 or 2 years.
And then for in addition to, for some of the economic development and chamber folks, and in terms of workforce housing, how far are folks currently driving to get to their jobs, and what does that look like in terms of like workforce housing in the region?
I know that a lot of our resorts and stuff are building stuff so their workers can stay right here. But I mean, we have a ton of workers that are driving Bemidji, Brainerd, Grand Rapids coming in, or Grand Rapids.
I can speak to that too. We employ about 90 people in just the Health, Human Services Division, and our turnover rate is affected by those that are driving an hour and a half. And in the winter and the weather conditions that we have constant turnover for that, which impacts the delivery of services based on housing, but also, the drive to that. I just wanted to make one other point too. Housing is our foundation for stability and the core that everyone needs for that. And one important thing that I just want to make sure we understand too is that leads to just not our employment, but we have found our children are placed, homelessness, mental health, our jail systems with use. All of those are tied to a lack of a stable home and employment and health. Cass County is 86 out of 87 counties. We're at almost the bottom of health factors because of transportation, housing, health, and employment. So it starts with housing, in my opinion.
Definitely. I know due to time, we probably want to transition over to transportation and broadband in the sector. Does anyone else have anything else to add on housing, or?
We'll always come back and circle back on other pieces. Regarding transportation, one of the things that we've been hearing from other counties and stuff is just for on specific projects for roads and anything. Is there something that our office should be tracking about for a project here that's impacting Cass County?
Yeah, I can speak on that. Mike Paulus, Cass County Economic Development Corporation. So we are a nonprofit. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the county, but on behalf of my own organization. I know that there is an issue with transportation. Obviously, we have very little as far as total mileage in the way of 4-lane or greater in this county. We have 0 in the way of rail. So, and as you take a look at that, transportation is holding back development from the standpoint of we're not able to as easily attract large manufacturers, maybe expanding divisions of other successful companies that are looking for a place to move in here, because what are they gonna do? They're gonna drive on a 2-lane road with their semis for who knows how long, and in the summer, it's not easy traveling 371, because you've got the fish houses, trailers, you've got the boats, and it's not conducive to industry. And I know that there's a project number in place already for a 4-lane expansion through Pine River, I believe, north of that 5-6 miles. I understand it's waiting on funding. I don't think there's anybody that would argue the point that Cass County has been neglected from an investment standpoint. And I think it's time that we keep that investment in place and that we get that project funded. I feel like that's a positive step to address that transportation. It doesn't solve rail. What I've been told is rail is gonna be an act of Congress basically to get something done with that. But the 4 lanes there, it's in place, we just need the funding to extend it a little bit further, and we can start kind of chipping away at that. You bring transportation, it's easier to bring in businesses, it's easier for private developers to justify building housing, it's easier for spawn-off businesses to come from that. And this seems like an easy win for us to get done.
Yeah, and with 371, is that the one that you're trying, that I've been hearing, is that the one we're trying to expand to a 4-lane, to connect, I think it's to Bemidji?
Yeah, well, you're hearing some broader, yeah.
Okay.
North of Pequot Lakes, all the way.
Okay.
This one's like from Jenkins that you're talking about?
Yeah, from Jenkins, and it's through Pine River, the project number. And then 5 or so miles north. I'm not talking about, hey, we've got to figure it out from there north, that's a bigger issue, but we've got a project number in place, let's get this thing funded and at least get the problem at least partially addressed.
You're getting people primarily on board for the 4-lane to stay the Y, which would be effectively the casino.
Okay.
Beyond that, trying to run a 4-lane directly through our city, that's a little bit more controversial.
Right, because there's the city's history itself and their businesses, but
it's difficult. There's a myriad of problems that go with that, not the least of which is if you take 371 going through the city itself and take all the parking away.
Okay.
We already don't have parking at all in the zone, none.
Okay.
So trying to take that away and then running 4 lanes directly through the city, it's just difficult. There would have to be a broader plan to that part of it.
Okay.
As of right now, the last meeting I was at with Representative Stauber, his office had come up and met with us in Bemidji, and it seemed like everybody was pretty on board with at least bringing the 4 lane this far, and then sitting down back at the table and trying to figure out a better plan to take it further from here.
Is there anything as far as the federal funding side of this thing that's been frustrating that our office can start highlighting with our staff out in DC?
We find that we finally got to this point where we kind of agree on, yeah, it sounds like it's a good idea to bring the 4 lane to this point. So the last bill that had been proposed was to fund a study to determine whether that would even be a project that MnDOT would want to do, or whether that would take precedence over some other routes that I think they had said were potentially more dangerous, they had more accidents on. There were other projects that would maybe be ahead of ours that just from a fatality standpoint.
Oh, okay.
Just what tougher roads to travel.
Okay.
So I don't know that we ever got to the point of funding being a problem so much as getting to the point of whether or not that was even a viable project.
Okay.
But we know that funding is an issue with the current project number that takes the 4 lane from Jenkins to north of Pine River, because that's in place and essentially just waiting on funding. So that component is what I'm speaking to right now, which is, that seems like something we can get fired off and get some investment going in Cass County.
Okay. You mentioned before the impacts of transportation. Can you kind of expand on that, bring it back there?
Sure. Well, I mean, I would just like to say first though that there is rail that comes through Cass County, but it's very near the edge of Cass County on Highway 2, and so that bisects the Leech Lake Reservation and goes through Cass Lake as well. So with the FAST Act, that includes funding for the Indian Reservation Roads Program, and that's a formula-based funding for each of the Indian reservations that has a tribal roads program. Now, the history of that roads program is there was a very convoluted formula that was put in place in the early 2000s that basically allow, for example, a tribe in Wisconsin to put Interstate 94 from the border at Hudson to the border at Beloit in the Indian Reservation Roads inventory, and they received millions of dollars for that, versus us here on Leech Lake with our roads inventory, we weren't able to put critical need roads in. Now, the FAST Act changed that formula somewhat and made it less burdensome, but there's still a competitive factor to it that really shouldn't be there when we're talking about travel road development. And one of the reasons why I think the Indian Reservation Road Program is so crucial across the board here is we can look at, for example, Cass County Road 8, which goes from Bena south down to Highway 200, just north of Longville. That's completely within the boundaries of the reservation. And there's a section of that we got added in the Indian Reservation Roads inventory, and we're able to do a project where the Boyd River leaves Leech Lake, and we're able to build a bridge there. And that was in conjunction with Cass County roads, Leech Lake roads, and then the federal government. And that's a really good example of collaboration on infrastructure that we at Leech Lake want to see more of and as much as possible. And just because of our status as a sovereign nation and our ability to go to Congress and lobby where the local governments are restricted in that, we're able to do more in that front, and we're happy to do that because that benefits the overall community, and that's what we want to see. And so we're definitely, we'd like to see the formula for the Indian Reservation Roads Program become less competitive, and the formula factor in large land-based reservations like the Leech Lake Reservation, which is a 800,000 plus acre reservation. So right now the formula is really geared towards the smaller reservations, but when you're talking about transportation infrastructure, it really should focus on the large land-based reservations. Nothing against the reservations that are smaller, but they don't need the transportation infrastructure, because when you look at the services that the reservation provides, most of them are located in Cass Lake, and we have communities like in Onagum and in Inger that are 50 miles away from Cass Lake. And so we need the roads infrastructure in order to get our services to those communities and to get our community members to the services.
That's interesting about saying less competitive, because the overall formula, as you were saying, based on it benefits tribes that are more densely populated. Has heard from the Midwest, in FAST Act, so we'd like to see that reversed. In other words, who is the senator from Oklahoma that is tight with the Cherokee Nation? Cole, yeah. They changed the formula, so basically to benefit that large and vocal group.
Yeah.
And so it affects Wisconsin, Michigan. The numbers are there, I can share them with you. That'd be something to work on FAST Act, right? Overall funding also.
Yeah. The formula is set within the act itself. Yeah.
Can you tell them about, I forget that it's a road crossing, it's a really dangerous crossing that a lot of kids use. What road is that? That's one.
Are you talking about Highway 2?
Yeah.
The Palace.
We gotta figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Tell the senators and stuff about that. We gotta something. Yeah, right? Isn't it Casper?
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is actually right in Cass Lake, and there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and what actually we've gotten permission for to use some of our roads funding for has been to build trails along this off of the highway, but alongside of the highway, so that the pedestrian traffic can use those trails instead of walking right on the road or the highway. And so right now in Cass Lake, as many of the local people probably know, the band just opened a new casino just on the east side of Cass Lake, north side of Highway 2. But most of the community is located on the south side of Highway 2. And Highway 2 is very part of that very limited 4-lane in Cass County, but it's a very so one of the things that our, roads department and, tribal development department are looking at right now, is they'd actually like to build a pedestrian overpass of Highway two, near the junction of Highway 371. But probably on the west side of the junction of Highway 371, because then they're, kind of going more into the community of Gaslight there. And so, we've had some very initial and preliminary discussions with Minnesota Department of Transportation on that, but, I'm sure that that's also something that we'd like to see some federal funding on as well. And that would, because even right now, the new casino just opened, within just the last several weeks, and, those of us who drive on Highway 3, you can just see the very much increased foot traffic across the highway, and that, is very dangerous, and, I mean, it's just ripe for accidents.
And on specific projects like that, never hesitate to reach out to our office. We'll often even join up with Congressman Sauber's office or any other representatives to write letters of support. It's something that our office can do is shed a spotlight on those issues with the administrators of those programs. So if there is something that you're looking at, you're applying for your grants, always don't hesitate to reach out to our offices and try to help get that letters of support to kind of emphasize the importance of those projects.
Sure, yeah. And, just the other thing that I would mention on that is, there was a junction on Highway 2 and our former casino was the Bingo Palace, which was on Bingo Palace Drive. And at that junction, which is about 2 miles west of Cass Lake, there was what do you call it? Do you call it like a J intersection that was put in? A J turn, yeah. So it wasn't a straight cut across anymore, so it was all traffic is turning right there, and then if you need to go east on Highway 2, then you make a left-hand turn down to the J. And so that was put in place, but now that the casino is no longer open, the traffic on that road is much reduced, and so now we're looking at the possibility on the intersection of the frontage road, the east side of Cass Lake, the frontage road on Highway 2. We're looking at that junction as probably going to be doing the upgrade here because it wasn't designed for the amount of traffic that's flowing through there right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Just because of time, we'll probably circle back to some of these things as well, but I do want to transition a little bit on broadband now, if that's okay. Can I kind of hear the needs, but we've been hearing different needs from different communities as far as the either the underserved or unbacked, anybody want to speak to that? Or any other issues when it comes to focusing on broadband?
Here we have one thing, I'm Steve, I work with Public Communications, and we've utilized state broadband grant programs, some federal programs to expand our service territory dramatically. And right now, the USDA has their Reconnect grant program. And I guess, we look at that as well as many other companies in Minnesota, and we elected to not apply for funding under that program, as did most other companies in the state. And if you look at the regulatory burdens that were attached to that program, small companies like ours, we don't have teams of lawyers and grants workers and things like that to hire and comply with all these requirements, as many other smaller companies in the nation. And I guess I would just encourage your office to encourage USDA to be conscious of the requirements of these grants and the burdens they create, and in a lot of ways how they really don't put the job done. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I know they're out there, and lots of companies will be able to take advantage of them. I've also heard rumors that after this next grant funding gets announced, that there's another $570 million getting announced in that program. That's great, but I just would encourage you to make it usable for the small companies.
Could I flesh out an example from me, just because sometimes stories.
It's been about 6 to 9 months since I looked at that application. I can't recall the details, but like I said, I'm hoping to try and use it.
Okay.
I could toss another thing out there too, if that's okay. This is more of a state thing, would be to look at cable TV franchising rules. I know it sounds a little crazy, what does that have to do with broadband? But it actually does, and again, this is more of a state thing, but there was certainly federal legislation that enabled this. The problem is that the cable TV rules and regulations were introduced in the 1980s. We all know the cable TV industry is dying because the rates are going up, and a
in many cases, that cable TV service, it helps us when I'm doing a business model, we say, do we go into this community, do we go into, we see this community has some core DSL-based service, we bring fiber home to that community. Well, we look at some of the rules and the burdens that municipalities put on us, and it often makes it cost prohibitive to do so. And so I guess I would encourage, some reining in of the cable TV's rules and the abilities of cities to dream up whatever they want and the way requirements to put on. Now, the FCC just ruled on that a little bit, or changed some rules about a month ago that helps us a little bit, so we're in there. Those are, I mean, I know there's a kind of off the wall thing for most people, I think we're probably most interested in these little factors that affect our, but those things affect our growth and affect where we can offer broadband, because they can change our business models and discourage growth.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand you. So I know one of the things the senator has been a big advocate of is the dig once kind of a policy.
Yeah.
That when you lay, when you dig right ground, either it's for a road or it's for anything like that, that we can lay all the infrastructure for exactly expanding broadband. Are you saying that the cable TV franchises prohibits that in any way?
No. Basically, for example, I'll give you an example. One of the projects I looked at was to get into the rural areas of the city of Hibbing.
Okay.
The city of Hibbing's 186 square miles. It's a massive city. The city offers services just kind of in the town itself, but the rural people don't get any city services. Their cable TV franchise agreement that they have with Mediacom there says you have to provide service to everybody. Everybody where they offer utilities service, or they offer water, or whatever utilities, sewer, that type of stuff. But the people in the rural get nothing. We would have gone in and served some of those people in the rural area, except to get the cable TV franchise agreement, we have to agree to the same terms that the other provider.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So in that case, we just said, forget it, we're not going there.
Okay.
And so that will change that. With regard to dig once, I would encourage you to be cautious about that. I think to outsiders, I should say it's not, I don't mean that derogatory way. People not in the industry, dig once sounds great. I mean, in a lot of places it makes a lot of sense, especially in densely populated urban areas. In rural areas, it's not something we would typically use. And I'll tell you why. So let's say you put in, let's say you take care of Lenny over here, and he puts in a road somewhere, and they put in a conduit, or they make a dig once policy. There's a lot of ways this can be done. But if we go and if we are forced then to use particular conduits or that are installed as part of that process, it creates real challenges if there's a repair situation. And that equipment gets damaged, our delay time is greatly reduced because there's going to be all kinds of utilities in a very tight quarter, and we don't want that.
Okay.
Secondly, in some areas it encourages competition, which most people want, but when you're making a business case to go into an area that's already not going to get broadband, having more competitors there doesn't help the business model. And thirdly, from a cost perspective, in a rural environment, our cost to put fiber in the ground in a conduit that's down the side of the highway versus just with going in with a vibrating plow is about the same per foot. It seems crazy, but when you're dropping a plow in and just driving, it's a lot easier than trying to blast the fiber through a pipe that's this big and turns and bends and twists and has all kinds of things. They're never perfect in the real world. They look great on paper, but when they get installed, they're not, and so that's why the cost is so high. So I don't want to discourage. I mean, in the right place makes a lot of sense. You get dense urban areas, it makes a lot of sense. Complex intersections, if you did a road job through, say, Highway 2 and US 71, we might want to get a pipe through there and not have to bore into that highway. River crossings where there's not any kind of wetlands or something, that makes sense. But just as a general, something you put out there to require people to use could be problematic. So I guess write that legislation carefully is my point. Don't make it mandatory on companies like ours to use it, and don't make it mandatory on companies like ours to put in additional pipes for our competitors, because then we'll discourage our investments in communities.
Appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Anybody else on broadband?
Yeah, broadband is really important for us. As I mentioned earlier, we have some outlying communities that are 40 or 50 miles away, and one of the big things for us is we have clinics in these rural communities, and so what we rely on actually is telemedicine, just because of the lack of access to in-ground broadband, several years ago, probably a decade ago now, we actually had to enter into agreements with AT&T where we leased tribal land to AT&T and they put up towers, you know, and then that's what provided the ability for us to have telemedicine at these very rural, some of the folks here in Cass County are familiar with the community that we have called Sugar Point, which is on the east side of Leech Lake, and there's one road going in and one road going out, you know, and but we still have probably about 100 tribal members that live in that community, and so in order for us to provide the services there, we needed to put up AT&T tower. I mean, they paid for the tower, we leased them the land. I mean, it was a good deal, but I mean, that's just sort of the, the innovation that we had to use up here because we don't have that access to that broadband that is generally available in other areas. And so, I mean, that's an example of us, coming up with a solution, but I mean, long term, I mean, ideally, we would like to see as much in-ground, broadband as possible throughout our the reservation.
Is the lack of broadband affecting sort of senior care and senior housing, or keeping seniors in their home and being able to care for them, or like the telehealth aspect of it?
Not as much. Yeah, the telehealth aspect was really communicating from the clinic that's in Onegum to the hospital in Cass Lake. That was the telemedicine aspect of it that we use on the trial. Yeah, we may be seeing more of that as an option for people to have telemedicine at home. But right now, I'm not hearing of that as a crucial issue.
I hear quite a bit from people as we are looking to expand the areas. That's a draw to keep people in their homes. And there's just more and more of these medical devices that people have. They're monitoring their blood sugar and their blood pressure and all these things. We received in the last month probably 3 or 4 letters from people begging us to come because of those things. And my husband can't stay in our house anymore because he can't work his cardiac monitors now linked over, over Wi-Fi to your broadband, and they're really heart-wrenching letters from people are saying, please come, or we have to go in the home. That's tough.
How's that impacting the local economy?
I haven't heard a lot, like Teresa, I just haven't heard that. Like you saying that, I haven't heard that at all.
It's out there, the conversations are out there.
I think in this area, the broadband penetration is a lot better than the rest of the city.
Yeah.
I mean, you got, it's just better. If you look at Beltrami County, it's #1 in the state. And it's a different environment here than in other parts of the state. Where I hear all these things are out in the Iron Range, which we have presence out there. But here we rarely hear this, because I think the broadband is much better in these areas.
It's good to hear. That's the first we've heard that on our report, so it's actually good. When we're checking the temperature in every county like that, that's something we're trying to keep track of, is making sure that we are doing what we can to make sure that you are getting that kind of access. Great.
Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes left before kind of our allotted time here. So I know we have a pretty diverse set of representation, different sectors of the community out here. Are there any other pressing issues that you'd like to raise with us that the center should be aware of?
I have a small, it's big here, but to do with transportation. I work with volunteer drivers, and we're losing volunteer drivers who are the key for transportation in these rural counties where there isn't transit. Because of the charitable mileage reimbursement rate, which is 14 cents a mile, which is unrealistic for providing any kind of reimbursement, and can only be changed by Congress. It hasn't been changed in 20, 30 years. So I beg of you to encourage something to be done to address that before we lose all of our volunteer drivers and really have no transit and nothing to fill in the gaps.
Peterson is sponsoring that, and Scholars, and all the people in the house. It's taking a while because it's tax related, and half our government doesn't want to touch any legislation unless they're cutting them. So
it's having a real impact on
Yeah,
The
yeah.
ability to recruit and retain volunteers to do that driving.
Not
And-
stubborn.
Right, yeah, we get a lot of calls from folks in the area who have expressed those same issues, and so I know it's definitely something we've been talking with, Pete about and our legislative staff in DC about those. And that was a big, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that was a big topic of discussion as well in Aiken as well, or not Aiken, Mora, I believe. Yeah, at the point I had a conversation with the mayor at the end of the discussion where he was literally volunteering to drive veterans, to get their care, so.
We're gonna potentially, a lot of people that volunteer drive are like, older. They're kind of doing this as a community kind of service. So that's another aspect. If it's so expensive, these are people also know the area, you know what I mean? I don't know, they're irreplaceable, right? I mean, yeah, that's another facet of this, and we're losing those people.
Well, and then if the gas tax goes up again to provide infrastructure with the roads, then it's gonna get even worse. It's just gonna double the issue, because then the gas prices are gonna go up and you're not gonna have anybody.
Yeah, we don't have public transportation.
No,
We
none
don't
at
have
all.
light rails, we don't have buses, we still drive everywhere. And when we do drive, a lot of us still drive trucks or four-wheel drives. It's not easy to put a plow on a Prius. So I would be curious.
Really?
It's just not, and we drive in dangerous conditions, and we drive very long distances to go shopping. A lot of us do. We'll go to Baxter, or Brainerd, or Bemidji, or Park Rapids, or we do. And so you're gonna get a lot of pushback on a gas tax from, I would guess, the northern half of the state, given the fact that we know that there's probably as many, if not more, cars on the road than there have ever been. So I would look at registration for that. And we also know that there are Priuses on the road. So I'm guessing that those guys aren't paying anywhere near as much gas tax as somebody that drives a full-size truck does. And that's fine, that's great, good. I understand that you don't wanna make it incentivized to have people drive gas guzzlers, but there's a reality of life in the northern half of northern Minnesota that we have to face, that in urban centers, they don't. So, when you're talking about a straight gas tax, that's a tougher situation for a lot of us, and you probably ought to look at funding some of the roads through registration, especially because we've been approached from the city side, from Tesla or anybody else, any number of people that wanna do charging stations. Well, those cars still drive on the road, they do. So they're still having an impact on the destruction of the highways as well, and unless you figure out a way to blend it, I'm guessing you're still gonna get a lot of pushback on trying to raise the revenue. I understand the necessity for it, but you're gonna have to spread the pain a little bit more evenly than what you would be if you did it, and it's just gonna have an outsized effect on us up here.
I do have something to bring up, and it's the Superfund site on the southern edge of Cass Lake. There was a presentation a month or so ago, maybe. EPA came in again with their recommended solution cleanup, which again has storing, distributing the contaminated material on reservation land. It's not an acceptable solution to anybody. Nobody wants their area contaminated, and certainly they don't want somebody else's mess stored on their land. And nobody supports that in this area that I'm aware of. I think it's an absolute joke that EPA isn't on board with taking the contaminated materials to a storage facility that's more than welcome to having it. It's a little more expensive, but somebody needs to get behind this so we can get this area cleaned up and the economy of Cass Lake can move on. Because if there's something other than housing that's holding this area hostage, it's that Superfund site.
Absolutely. And I would just say, in fact, one of the reasons why I brought up there is rail in Cass County that goes through Cass Lake is, years ago I sat on the Cass Lake City Council, and we had a developer approach us about putting in a development in our industrial area in Cass Lake, which is all Superfund site right now for manufacturing, and that didn't go anywhere once they found out there's a Superfund site, and the site has been there since the 80s, and so at the public hearing, we had tribal members who got up and said, I've never known Cass Lake without a Superfund site. And I mean, that's a crazy thing when you think about some of the Superfund sites, like in urban areas, that get cleaned up right away, and within a matter of years, they're redeveloped, a matter of 5 or 6 years, they're cleaned and redeveloped and gentrified and everything else. And then you look at this site that for, the better part of 30 plus years is still not cleaned up. And EPA's solution after several years and go-arounds with tribal consultation and consultation with the community and local government, their plan is to, and they think it's cleaning up, to move contamination from one operable unit on the same site to another operable unit on the same site. And that it's ludicrous. Nobody thinks that that's any progress other than the EPA. And that needs to be made clear to them. Their record of decision is scheduled to come out in October. And so we have done everything we could from the band standpoint to ensure that, that the decision is to move the contamination off the site. But so far it's fallen on deaf ears.
And what's really sad about that is 3 or 4 years ago, they made this recommendation. Everyone was up in arms because it's a bad solution. And they started the presentation with, well, we're here today, this was last month, with the same recommendation, but for different reasons. And then they just put a different spin on it. We've been stuck in the mud way too long, and we need some additional legislative support to move this thing forward and get a solution that's appropriate.
And I'm absolutely going to connect with you more about that offline, but we're kind of wrapping up here because I know other people have other meetings to do the rest of the day. We do have to go in one last step today. We're going to be around here for a couple of minutes if you want to just grab us and to exchange information or anything like that. But I wanted to say thank you all for making the time to come out and join us. This is feedback that is really helpful for our office as we're expressing this to the senator for this area. So thank you so much.